We are born free.
And we will die free.
The time in between, though,
That's complicated.
in that time, governments, institutions, and our egos will limit our ability to find true freedom in this life. These are real stories of real people overcoming the odds, persevering in justice, and unlocking their potential. Welcome to Finding Freedom. Here's your host, John Odermatt.
Welcome back for another episode of Finding Freedom here on the Lions of Liberty podcast. And ladies and gentlemen, I always talk about, in this intro period before I get into the interview, of the variety show aspect we have to the Lions of Liberty, how you get a little bit of everything. And this week, oh my God, this week has been the most variety you could ever get. We kicked off the week on Monday with Mark's flagship program, interviewing Pete Quinones, Asarchist, and Neocon Remover, one of the most ridiculous shows Mark has ever done. If you missed that, for the love of God, go back and listen to it. And then on yesterday, you heard Brian McWilliams, Jason Stapleton, and Michael Bolden, just in a drunken state of debauchery, talking about all sorts of different things. It has been quite a week, my friends. And today on Finding Freedom, great interview with friend of the show, Alan Mosley, host of It's Too Late. We had a great time talking about a lot of different topics. You're really going to enjoy this episode of Finding Freedom. Please, I want to encourage you, if you like what we're doing here at Lions of Liberty, please, give us that. Now they're calling it on Apple Podcasts, they call it a follow. So follow our podcast, hit the little plus symbol, whatever app or podcatcher you're listening on. Give us a subscription, follow, give us a 5-star review and leave a little comment for us. A little love helps us with the algorithms, and we appreciate it. So please do that. And if you've been listening for a while and you really enjoy this show, Mark and Brian and I, we're doing this pretty much for free. We really don't get any money off this. We cover our costs. So please consider jumping over to Patreon, patreon.com/Lions of Liberty, and giving us a little pledge there. It's a fact that we have the best Patreon in the Liberty movement. All the free stuff we give away, all of the bonus content, Degenerate Gamblers, Conspiracy Corner, getting a bunch of free content early. All the Dave Smith debates, you get to see them live first before anyone else. So please, come on, patreon.com/Lions of Liberty. Join the Lions of Liberty Pride. Why wouldn't you? Do it right now. All right, I cannot wait for you guys to hear today's episode. Let's get to it. My guest today on Finding Freedom is Alan Mosley. Alan is a historian, a jazz musician, an author, an aspiring grifter, and he's also the host of It's Too Late, and he self-described on his website, it's the #1 show in late night of all podcasts in the Liberty movement, filmed in Tennessee, that are hosted by a guy named Alan. Alan, welcome to Finding Freedom.
I'm glad to be here. I really need to update that bio now that I've heard it out loud.
It's the first time anyone's ever read your bio back to you? Are you kidding me?
No, it really is. I think people think I was joking. That's the most truthful thing I've ever said in my life.
I think it's a great bio. I love when bios are, not just the boilerplate, listing, blah, blah, blah.
Oh,
He's been doing a podcast for this long, and that's annoying. I like when there's some creativity in bios. So especially when there's a little creativity, I like to read that so people can hear it. But good to have you on the show, man. I know you've been on with Mark. We were just talking before the show. I was saying that I just recently forgot to hit the record button on my latest episode of Finding Freedom. And you said that happened with Mark Claire when you were, I guess he was on your show, and then you were on with him about 6 months ago. So for people who haven't heard that episode on Lions of Liberty on our flagship program, let's start off giving us some background on yourself. How did you get started with the podcast? And, it's too late. You have this great people who aren't watching the video. You can see it on YouTube or Odyssey. You got to see Alan's background here. It's worth it just for that. So tell us your story.
Well, I'll split those into two. First will be how we got started, and then how we transitioned to doing a late night show. So the original show, for people that have been following me for a while, was The Gold Standard with Alan Mosley, and we did that at the studios south of Nashville with my friend and old producer Blake Osborne. And it was more a what you traditionally think of as a podcast. We did it in video, but that was just because we had the tools at our disposal. But it was really more like your typical talk radio type of a show, and we had a lot of guests. I mean, a lot of the typical names you would expect in our neck of the woods, the Ron Paul, Lou Rockwells, Jeff Dice, Tom Woodses of the world, and that sort of thing. And we probably stuck a little bit more to history and politics, and as opposed to a little bit more entertainment and current events and things like that. And that was a revival. I actually had a radio program actually on terrestrial radio, WMRB, here in Middle Tennessee, and that was a sports station. That was a sports station who, for people who don't know, a lot about radio, a lot of radio stations around the country are really all owned by a handful of conglomerates, and they're just getting the signal piped in from the satellite. And a lot of those stations will have a few hours per week or afternoon or whatever for local programming, and the rest of it is, ESPN. Well, they used their local programming for some local politics and stuff like that. And they had a show called Get in the Game because, it's a sports station. And that was the Get in the Game was their politics show. And they invited me on a few times, said, hey, this is really awesome. You should just be kind of like our permanent in-house, guest person. And I said, okay, cool. And they wanted to rebrand it. And we decided on the Gold Standard. And so that radio station went under. I'll leave it up to the audience's imagination if that was my fault or not. And then I revived that program as a podcast. And so it was, so basically like I said, it was really your just kind of typical radio talk, politics, history, economics type show. But as we started to get into it was always a weekly program. And as we started to get into 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 episodes, I started to get to the point where, in some ways, current events is good because you always have things to talk about, right? But in the other sense, you can also catch yourself thinking, I'm getting burnt out, because a lot of this is just rage porn is what I would call it. It's just, okay, so there was a cop shot somebody this week. Okay, first of all, that's every week. And second of all, I can't deal with it anymore. Like this can't be the topic of our show every week, right? Yeah. And so we already were sort of flirting with doing more pop culture and more entertainment. And even though we were having a lot of the similar type guests, I was kind of challenging them to say, hey, come on and be positive and joke with me and have a good time. And let's talk about some hobbies you have that you never talk about, things that you never write about in your profession or whatever. And then as we started to kind of push the envelope of graphics and entertainment and music and things like that, it's like, well, you know what? I love Craig Ferguson, who had the Late Late Show before.
He was good. Craig was good. Yeah. I enjoyed his show.
Craig was my favorite. And I was like, I would rather be Craig Ferguson than Bill O'Reilly. And so
I agree.
So I literally took 3 weeks off and sat down with the computer and some equipment and my brain and some coffee and figured it out. And then now we produce It's Too Late with Alan Mosley.
Craig Ferguson, he was like the villain in Old School, right? Wasn't he? Was that Old School when he was making out with the server in the bathroom, and he was dating?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and then he was on Drew Carey there for a while.
Was he?
He was on the Drew Carey show. I got them
confused. I'm thinking of not Craig Ferguson. I'm thinking of prior. Am I getting confused here? Prior to Craig Ferguson.
Are you thinking of Craig Kilborn?
Yes, I'm thinking of Craig Kilborn. Too many Craigs.
Yeah, it was because they replaced. I mean, that was kind of a running gag of Ferguson's for years. Is that if they were making fun of him, they would say, "Is Craig Kilborn there?" But Craig Ferguson was awesome because he was a late night show host, but his whole shtick was everything was kind of a little bit lower brow than most, and it was a little bit it's something that we try to emulate on our show, which is, look, I don't have $1 million. The production that we do is like it's me figuring it out as I go. I don't have a team or money to do it. But if you can do it well while at the same time kind of maintaining some of that all shucks, homie, we're just sort of, using duct tape and that sort of thing. It kind of is endearing. And that was something Craig was really good at. And he was also really big about deconstructing the platform. So it is a late night show, but he's not like all the other late night shows. He's really going out of his way to stand out. And I really take that to heart from just purely from an artistic, not a political standpoint, though goodness knows we stand out. But from a artistic standpoint, trying to do a show that if you watch my show randomly with 50 other podcasts, you're going to remember that who was that one guy doing the whole shtick? And I'll be like, hey, I stood out in that guy's mind.
That's good. And we need more of that, I think, in the Liberty community. I always tell, people who want to start podcasts, because, in this day and age, or if you're listening to this in the future, this is 2021. This is in the height of the Liberty podcast boom. I hope we don't get any more Liberty podcasts.
Yeah.
But I tell people, start a podcast about something else, or just something that you want to hear, because it's going to be really hard to gain any traction, having a Liberty podcast right now. So just do something different. And then, that stuff, those ideas will just kind of bleed through along the edges. And people need to hear that. We need these ideas in culture in different ways. So I think it's great what you're doing.
Something that I've said on the show several times and have talked about in other interviews is I in my mind, like I'm not trying, this is not me subtweeting anyone. So for the love of God, don't at me on Twitter, but I cringe every time.
What is your Twitter in case people want to at you?
It's Alan Mosley TV. So there you go. Everything's Alan Mosley TV, but
there you go.
The people who either ask each other every 5 minutes, so how did you find liberty? Or even worse, the people who say, like, they feel like it's their job to have commentary. Every single time anything happens on planet Earth, they feel like their responsibility is to tell people, well, the libertarian position on this is X. And I'm like, so first of all, we don't do that. I try really hard to not come off as I'm preaching to you that, well, I'm a libertarian and I know everything. And therefore, when this guy dropped a balloon, the libertarian position on this is X. I never do that. What I try to do instead is I just do my show and talk about the things that interest me and talk to people I like. And I hope that it's a successful and entertaining program that just so happens to be hosted by a libertarian. And maybe that's a different way of entering the sphere than trying to pointedly tell people directly, I'm going to let you know what to think.
Yeah, I think it's good. And I think there is, just talking with, my fellow co-hosts here at Lions of Liberty, Mark and Brian, and I know many others in this movement who are getting sick of, in fact, on the show, I think it was Monday's show, this will air this week. So Mark had on Pete Quinones and Ace Arcus and Neocon Remover. Those are their Twitter names. People don't go by real names anymore. That's another thing. But just talking about how people are just getting tired of this, just talking philosophy, and not that there's anything wrong with philosophy, but the problem is it's not going to be applicable in real life, probably in our lifetime. So there's only so much you can do. And I think that there's been a lot of maturity in this movement to the point where we got to take steps forward and, move into different sectors and do different things. So anyway, I think we've beat this horse enough. So when you are filming your show and you're looking for guests, what type of people do you look for in a guest then? Are you having on people who have nothing to do with the Liberty movement, and or is that something you've done?
Well, so it's harder actually with It's Too Late than it was with the gold standard, the original iteration. Is that, for one, I tell people all the time, there's no such thing as a liberty movement. There's only I eschew collectivist jargon, and I try to with the gold standard, since it was much more explicitly this is a libertarian program. We're talking to people in this community that are very like-minded and whatnot. It was obviously very more niche. But with It's Too Late, I'll be totally honest with you. The challenge has often been, I mean, we've had guests before that I would like to have back, but this isn't the same show. And unfortunately, there's kind of that running gag in our neck of the woods of libertarians being on the spectrum. And I'm here to happily report that's totally true. Libertarians are autistic as all get out. And so unfortunately,
there's nothing wrong with that, but yeah, it's
unfortunately for a lot of those people, they're not entertaining. Like, I'll call a spade a spade. They're not entertaining. They're not particularly well spoken. And if you're trying to do a late night show where when we produce the show, we basically do it as a live take, sort of like Saturday Night Live. Like, all the commercial breaks and bumpers, everything you see is literally happening right then as we're producing it. We basically don't edit our program. And so there are people who have had experience with, say, live radio or TV, and they kind of get the gist of, you've got a time frame, you go on, you've got your zingers ready to go, you're being receptive, you're keeping the conversation flowing, all that kind of stuff. But a lot of people have never had that experience before. And unfortunately, those types of people, and I'm not going to name any names because I'm already in trouble at this point, but those types of people don't make good late night talk show guests. You sort of need to be on your toes a little bit to be the guest on a late night talk show. Whereas if you're just purely talking political philosophy in just a 60-minute block of space, there's more space to just kind of let it ruminate and ponder the thoughts. But on a late night show, and for my part, I want to give people a chance to talk and I want to give them pointed questions, but I also want to poke a little fun. And if that's something that's intimidating to you, if you're someone who can't take a joke or can't fire something back, then maybe this isn't the program for you. And I'm not belittling that person. I'm just saying maybe a more traditional radio show is your bag and not this kind of a show.
Well, I think, to be perfectly honest, I think it takes practice and being in those situations to sort of learn how to do it. And I think I've gotten a little better at it over time. In addition to this show, Finding Freedom, I have another show with also Lions of Liberty Co. Brian McWilliams and Howie Snowden and Rico, the elusive legal counsel of Lions of Liberty. And it started out as we called the show Bravo and Beer. And it was just talking about, if you've ever watched like 90 Day Fiance or all those, shows that, that you watch with the wife, just breaking them down and making fun of the people on them. Really just banter, mindless banter, but sort of training that. I've noticed over time, it kind of trains that muscle to be able to, have that easy conversation back and forth. But we realized after doing like 50 episodes that it really sucks to talk about reality TV. So we've kind of pivoted and we're kind of talking about things like weird patents that we find and just going in some weird directions. But it's been a fun ride. We'll see where it takes us. I don't know.
Well, I mean, that's one of those things, though, where the concept of the show is great, but, it's kind of like the launch pad needed to be worked on a little bit, because in my experience, you can tell me if this is something you've shared. I've met all sorts of people that are like-minded to us in real life and visited with people and gone to meetups. And sometimes you have just such, you have such provocative, but also entertaining and free-flowing and joyous conversation with people. And sometimes when you think of doing a show like we're doing right now, you think, how can I synthesize that? How can I just, I wish I just had a camera and a microphone right then when we were all hanging out and having a good time, because in the process of doing it, some things came up and we had a very fruitful conversation. And so it's figuring out a way to put that in a bottle, and then distill that for this program. And so if you can do that, then you're going to have a hell of a show, and irrespective of what that particular week's topic is.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, you can look at the most successful podcast of all time, I would assume, being Joe Rogan, which is what he's done. He's been able to capture these interesting conversations, starting out with comedians and just mindless banter, but bringing on scientists and leaders in different fields of philosophy. And I mean, Joe's not the smartest guy, but he's able to carry on a conversation. He's able to ask questions, and he reads the books these people write, so he understands them at a base level, which is not easy to do. I could not be Joe Rogan. Most people could not be Joe Rogan. But I've noticed in listening to him, I don't know if you're a listener of his. I listen to maybe 1 out of 10 episodes, but it seems like it's getting more difficult for him. And I don't know if that's because I've been inundated with so much other content that I'm just seeing maybe some better content in different places. So his isn't seeming as good as it did at the time, if that makes sense. He's kind of maybe getting passed by others. But it's not easy to do once you do climb to the top of the mountain to maintain that.
So I mean, I like Rogan. I mean, I've known Rogan forever because I was a big MMA fan. So I knew who Joe Rogan was. And then when he got into the kind of podcast world is really his gig now. Talking at the UFC is a hobby at this point, or acting for that matter. But the thing about Rogan is that of course, he's been doing it for a long time, and he's talked to a lot of heavyweights. He's talked to a lot of huge personalities and experts and that sort of thing. And I'm definitely a believer that, obviously a talk show is not the same thing as a sitcom or a drama, but I definitely think that programs have a shelf life. And I mean, we could sit here and talk for hours about all the shows that we've seen on TV that you think, that show ended a few seasons too late. They peaked, they had some sort of really massive plot line, and then everything tied up. And then the network decided, let's spit out 3 more years for the cash. And it never quite recaptures that glory. I think Rogan's kind of in that place where when he was a little bit younger man and a little bit more energetic, he was good at that. Even if he obviously is not a rocket scientist, he was good at challenging his guests to inform him. Like, look, hey, you're the guest and everyone's here to listen to you. That's nothing. I'm just silly old Joe Rogan, but I'm going to challenge you to tell me why I'm so stupid and inform me about what it is that's your field of expertise. And people would come on, and I mean, it would be great. And it would be, good things for the layman to listen to. I mean, look, if Neil deGrasse Tyson goes on Rogan to talk about science, other scientists don't need to listen to it because that's their field. And people who aren't scientists need it to be dumbed down to where they can understand, which just so happens to be where Rogan can also understand, right? And so he was excellent at doing that. But I think, I think we're probably, hundreds of episodes past where that sort of had played. I mean, how many times can you talk to the same people? How many different people can you possibly talk to? I had that thought with myself with the gold standard. I thought, well, I had a short list of people I really wanted to meet and that was a vehicle to do it. And then when I did, it was like, uh-oh, now what do I do? I kind of didn't really have a plan after that, right? Like I got to talk to Ron Paul, and once I hung up with him on the phone, I was like, well, now who do I have next week? It's downhill from here, buddy.
Well, I'm sure you figured once you talked to all those people and brought those voices to everyone's ears, all your listeners, that you'd be a multimillionaire and just retire, right? So,
absolutely. I tell people every week when we're advertising our Patreons or PayPals or whatever is that I know what you're thinking. An anarchist late night talk show host who works for himself. I'm sure he's a multimillionaire, but I'm so greedy. I'd like you to donate some more. Exactly.
That's the dirty little secret of us libertarian podcasters. We're all closet multimillionaires, and we're just still taking the money because we're so greedy. But I want to come back to something you said, not to get too much into this, but sure. I just want you to clarify maybe for people. You said that you don't really think or would say that there's a liberty movement. And maybe to tie that together with something else that I heard on one of your recent episodes with Eric, the Rebel with the Cause. You guys were talking about labels and you not using the label libertarian, maybe using the anarchist label more. So do those two thoughts tie together?
In some ways. So I know that there's I was actually listening to something just the other day, and I heard my name come out of one of the people that were talking, and I thought, no one talks about me unless it's something terrible. And sure enough, what I mean, they were a friend of mine, incidentally, but what they were saying is that Alan goes around telling people he's not really a libertarian. Well, Alan, you are a libertarian. You can't run away from this word. And my explanation is, if I can defend myself, is while I know that there's crusader types out there who feel like language is really important and that words have meaning and that meaning should be protected, and I sympathize with some of those particular causes, the reality is that words are meant as communicative devices, and popular nomenclature, popular understanding is what a word means. Mm-hmm. And in my opinion, there are multitudes of people who use the word libertarian or add some type of prefix or suffix to it to identify themselves, and I don't identify with them. And so if in my mind there's only 15,000 libertarians on earth, but there's 500,000 more people who say, I'm a libertarian, I just so happen to want to bomb Afghanistan, then I'm like, well, I can either be the gatekeeper who travels the world telling everyone they're not a real libertarian, or I can distance myself from that. And I've done both, by the way. But since the former gets really tiring, I've decided to go with the latter and just and I know that there's people out there who think like me, that when they're with a group of people that aren't as deep in the weeds as you or I might be, they just say libertarian because it's a word that they might be more familiar with. They don't say anarchist because if they're not familiar with libertarian, anarchist is just going to think they're a terrorist, right? But in general, I just go with anarchist and I leave it at that. And I don't get into debates of all the various academic subcultures of anarchism and all that type of stuff. I just say I'm an anarchist and leave it at that. And
if people assume that you're throwing bricks through windows on the weekend at the Starbucks, then so be it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what's that? It's good to be feared and loved, but at least feared. So we'll just go with that.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of evolved. I don't know. I go back and forth on this. It is so true that, I mean, all these words have been stolen. I mean, classical liberal, that's gone. Sure. Libertarian, yeah. What does it mean when you have, someone like, I don't know, didn't Dick Cheney say at some point that he was libertarian leaning? Maybe I'm thinking of George W. Bush. Anyway, but it's the word has lost its meaning, and with anarchism, I've argued with anarchists saying another word lost its meaning. It's been taken by Antifa, and when people hear the word, they think violence in the streets, and it's really hard to overcome, especially like visual persuasion like that. When you see someone throwing a brick through a window, and the CNN host says that there is an anarchist, and the person at home is like, "Oh, okay, that makes sense," and then you can't get past that. But at a certain point in time, also, like you said, fine, if you want to associate me with that, whatever. Well,
like I know that there's people out there that they can't help but divorce themselves from kind of the pugilistic aspect of politics. They want to be in the game. They want to attach themselves to the winners. They want to be fighting against the bad, and they want to be engaged in the political process. And so those people are so much more concerned about some of the things you just said. Those people are more concerned and get angry when Mr. CNN guy says that's an anarchist and they're pointing at some random commie. And I get there again. It's obvious I'm not autistic like all of them are. I get that they're frustrated because they feel like they're not being represented properly. But that doesn't frustrate, and maybe at one point in time that did, but that doesn't frustrate me anymore because I don't care. Because me playing some type of numbers game, I'm not rushing to I'm an anarchist. I'm not rushing to the ballot box. I'm not voting for anybody. So us consolidating our numbers for some type of cause is purely irrelevant to me. I don't care. But it's a release though at the same time that, well, since I'm focusing so much more on self-improvement and people building networks and communities and not looking for positive action through political means, then those types of public representation don't matter anymore.
Yeah. Well, let's totally shift gears and talk about sports for a minute. So you're a self-described sports guy, right? You enjoy the sports ball. So I just realized I sent you like the wrong link before, but I'm sure you're smart enough to find the article that I was talking about.
I got it.
So the NCAA, SCOTUS, recently ruled unanimously, siding with college players against the NCAA with things like they're able to use their likeness to make money. And of course, there's this argument that immediately people push back and say, "Wow, these students are getting a free education for playing college football. Imagine if I could get free education for playing a game." So, what are your thoughts on this thing? And what are your thoughts?
Well, so that's a big question. And my good friend Mike Meharry and I, we used to do a show. We still tinker with it every now and then, called Sports Ball with Mike and Alan. And it's named that for exactly that reason. We're making fun of the bread and circus people. And but he and I are both big sports fans. And one of my biggest complaints my whole life has been that the NCAA is a cartel. I mean, it fits every single definition of what a cartel is. And what's worse, it's not just a cartel like you're thinking of Mexican drug runners, right? This is a cartel that's also sponsored and subsidized by the US government. Like, I mean, this is deep tentacles of Leviathan that we're talking about here. And so I support players in their endeavors. And I know, so to your point, when you said, well, you think about the people out there that, I mean, basically the traditional school of thought for decades and decades has been, well, players shouldn't get paid because that's going to open up Pandora's boxes, all sorts of different, perhaps perverse financial incentives the way they see it. But they are getting compensated because they're getting a scholarship to play sports. And, as you put it, man, I wish I could just play a game and get a full ride or whatever. Well, so first of all, yeah, I wish I could too, but it's not because I didn't just win the lottery. It's because I can't run a 440. It's because I can't field punts. I can't shoot threes at an 83%. I mean, come on, like let's be, the people who say that are people that never had a chance on this earth of ever being a professional athlete. So just dismiss them right out of hand. But further to the point is, while in some sense, I'm happy that there might be a ruling where players might be compensated in some real meaningful sense, because I mean, we could sit here and talk for hours about the risk of injury. I mean, there's players that are, I mean, we're not talking about breaking a leg. I mean, there's players that get paralyzed playing football. So, and you think of the risk. You think of players like I mean, I could sit here and tell you I've had numerous conversations with fair weather fans who would say, "Oh, our superstar junior decided to leave school and go declare for the draft. What an asshole! I wish he was still playing for us. Us as if they're on the team, right?" But these kids are way more often than not come from low or middle income families. And if they have a real chance of being a multimillionaire playing a professional sport, then college is not an education. College is at best a tryout, at worst a hurdle that a lot of the leagues are in collusion with one another to make sure that they have to go through. I mean, people could literally spend months digging in and seeing the untold amount of corruption and intermingling between the state and the major universities and even private universities in multiple divisions in all the sports, about how all of the money that goes into the TV contracts, all the money. I mean, there's lots of schools where their football team is paying their professors. What's funny, on that same token, there's lots of professors that say, "Why is the football coach making $10 million a year?" Because he's paying your salary, asshole. That's why he's making $10 million a year.
You look at like the University of Alabama, which they have arguably the greatest football coach of all time in Nick Saban. And the University of Alabama's track record academically prior to Nick Saban was not very good. And not just because of Nick Saban, but largely because of Nick Saban. All that money coming into the university, coming into that area, the academics have gotten much better with the University of Alabama. And I mean, that's not really an argument for or against paying players. That's just an argument about what drives college education, what drives the university system. And it's 100% sports. And with football being the biggest sport, it's pretty much football that drives everything.
Well, so specifically bringing up Nick Saban, I remember when he got his last contract extension, maybe a few years back, there was some articles out there that were specifically talking about exactly the subject of this man's making $12 million a year to be a football coach. The next, he's the highest paid, quote, public employee in that state, and it's by an enormous margin. You know, there's no other employed by the university or the state or the city that makes even 5% of what Nick Saban makes. But, you know, we're market guys, right? We're economic wonk type guys.
Yeah.
What's he making for the university? When you look at the fact that the football program's worth like literally like $1 billion, then you realize he's actually drastically underpaid. And if you could go start a university and have a football team in D1, you should be offering Nick Saban $50 million a year, and you'd be right to do it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that, so just to go back to this, the argument on the other side of this saying, well, the players are getting education. It's the same argument that, you know, people will say in major sports, Major League Baseball. They'll say, well, this player's making $50 million a year. They should be making that much money. Well, who should get the money? Who should that money go to? Should it go to the owner? Should the owner get all that money? Why shouldn't the player get the money? Are you arguing for, you know, more of these rich white men to get all the money? What's your argument here? It doesn't make any sense. But it's
No,
sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, you could peel so many layers off of this onion. You think of sports like, take the NFL, for example, that have salary caps for the teams. Why are there salary caps? Now, I know you might think, well, that's because then you'll have the Dallas Cowboys and or the Redskins or the Patriots or teams that have multi-billionaire owners. You know, they'll go out and buy all the best players. But first of all, there wasn't always a salary cap, and there's other sports that don't have salary caps, and yet in those sports, the quote unquote richest teams don't win every year. What was the last time?
That's a bit of a. I could argue the other side of that, but go ahead. I'll just finish your thought.
Well, you know, people like to use like the Yankees as an example. It's okay. You know, what was the last time the Yankees were the undisputed best team in Major League Baseball for a stretch of 3, 4, 5, 6 years because they have all the best players and everyone on their roster is making a killing? What was the last time?
It's been since the early 2000s, I think, right? Sometime in that range.
It's been some time. And so either they're wildly incompetent, which if you don't like
probably, I think it's maybe
you agree with that, or there's just more to it than that. That there's a finite resource pool of players, but you also reach a point of competition where there's other aspects at play other than just who runs the fastest, just who throws the hardest, just who hits the hardest. But to circle that back though really quick to the players specifically, and specifically for collegiate athletes, is that it's true that they might be on scholarship to the school, but that's just because that's how the system is designed. That's just the way the game is played. If you were a prospect coming out of high school and you genuinely were, I mean, you're talking, this is a 5-star blue chip guy, you know, he's wanting to go play in the NFL, then he's not really getting an education because he's only going to Alabama because he's required to go to some school before he can make the transition to the NFL, which is all a part of the game. That's all a part of the system. You think of, you know, obviously Kobe Bryant was in the news recently because of the tragic accident involving him. But the reason why I bring him up is he was one of the last players who transitioned from high school straight to the NBA. It was shortly after that the NBA then passed rules where you had to, and then what happened? Then you had 10,000 kids go to college for 1 year to play as freshmen and then go to the NBA.
Yeah, they go play for Rick Pitino and get paid also.
Yeah, you can't tell me that whole system is crooked from top to bottom. So to even evaluate one ruling on it at all is just scratching the surface.
Yeah. Just to circle back to what you were saying. So Major League Baseball, and I'm not necessarily in favor of a salary cap because, like you were saying, there's so many layers to this onion. I mean, all these teams have taxpayer funded stadiums, at least partially. The majority of the stadiums taxpayer funded. I'm in Pittsburgh. I'm a Pirates fan. It's horrible being a Pirates fan. Like they've lost 10 out of the last 12 games or something terrible. But the only way the Pirates can really compete being such a small market is if they are really bad for several years in a row, acquire a bunch of talent, and then maybe they can be good for 3 or 4 years in a row. Unless they get somebody who's really, a sharp GM who's able to kind of just keep that going, trading the players at just the height to get enough talent in return and keep that going. Which I still, honestly, from a baseball standpoint, because I'm a stats guy and I like following all that stuff in the minor league system, it's still entertaining for me to follow like a Pirates minor league system and watch, prospects and things like that, which is kind of weird to say. And I just, when it's years like that, like this year, I just ignore the major league team. So it's still entertainment, but until they strip out, like you said, the government being entangled in that system, it's really hard to argue one way or the other. And why are the Yankees not dominant? Why are the Dodgers not dominant every year? And I think the bottom line there is, even with a bottomless wallet, it still takes talent to identify and pay the right people. And you pay the wrong person $50 million a year, you're going to be paying them $50 million a year, and then you can't get rid of that contract, and they're taking up a place on your payroll. So I mean, just because you can spend the money doesn't mean that you're going to spend it the right way. But
I give you one more, a couple more quick football analogies. I'm a big football guy. Is that one of my biggest pet peeves is when the average, just run of the mill fair weather fan, say like Alabama's really good in football right now, is they'll say, could Alabama beat the New York Jets? And I always cringe when people say that. It's that no, the Jets would beat them 100-0. They would, if they had a mercy rule, they would do it at halftime. Because the difference between Alabama and the New York Jets, even if the Jets went 0-16, is that every single player that plays for the New York Jets is a professional football player. Not every player that plays for Alabama has any chance in the world of being a professional football player, no matter how good your college school. That would literally be men playing against boys. But another analogy, talking about how just the state and the perverse incentive structures and how it's so deeply entangled in sports organizations. I was a Cowboys fan growing up, and you think of the Dallas Cowboys in the early 90s, Jerry Jones had a big lawsuit was sued by the NFL. He was not wanting, they have a profit sharing agreement. It's a socialist organization, the NFL. And he didn't want a profit share with the rest of the NFL on merchandise, because in the early 90s, the Dallas Cowboys were selling 2/3 of all the merchandise that the NFL sold. Well, in any other market, you would say, well, wait a minute, why am I giving an equal 132 share to the rest of the league if I'm selling 66% of the merchandise? Yeah, I mean, it's hard to feel bad for Jerry Jones, don't get me wrong, but you could see, but like, well, that's ridiculous. I wouldn't want to be a part of that agreement. And I know that a neckbeard out there could say, well, they signed into the agreement because they're members of the league. But the reality is that the state controls everything, and there's these massive perverse incentive structures between the state and these organizations that, for one, to split off and create a new football organization has obviously proven multiple times to be difficult, if not impossible. Yeah. Thinking of the contracts, thinking of the stadiums, thinking of TV deals and that sort of thing, but that it in the same way with the players. Again, I'm not trying to equate poor old Jerry Jones with some random freshman playing for UT, but it's true. They're both in a similar way behind the 8 ball, whereas there is this systemic situation of which no matter how much clout or authority or money they have, they are absolute peons compared to the system. Jerry Jones, for all of his money and clout and being America's team, there is nothing he can do to touch the NFL and its state sponsors, in the same way that if you're We'll just use Trevor Lawrence as an example because he just got picked first. If Trevor Lawrence was still playing at Clemson and he said, I'm not going to play anymore until I get paid at Clemson, you know what? That means he wouldn't play anymore because he's an absolute peon compared to the cartel. The cartel would flick him off like a pest instantly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think, though, I mean, just to kind of wrap up this discussion, obviously, I think it's better for these kids. I mean, it's not ideal that, if someone coming out of extreme poverty in an inner city somewhere and barely escapes to make it to one of these college campuses, it's a shame that if they have the talent, they aren't able to go directly to the NFL like LeBron and Kobe did in the NBA. But at the same time, of course, I'm going to be in favor of them having the ability to, build up an Instagram following and, advertise products on their Instagram and make money that way or whatever. I'm not sure what this new SCOTUS ruling will allow, but it's something of that nature. It will allow them, I think, to profit off their likeness, which, of course, that's going to change recruiting, how these schools recruit. These schools will build up, the ability to help these young men build a brand, which is good. I mean, that's probably more valuable, building a personal brand, than getting an education in today's day and age, which I don't know if that's good or bad. It's certainly not all good or all bad. It's just the way the world is right now.
Well, that's just how you ended that statement is really the point. And it's really the point for a lot of societal issues with legal tendrils mixed in, is that you may have your own personal feelings on universities literally handing money bags to players, or you might say, well, isn't that going to create some perverse incentives if you say that they can benefit off their likeness, and then hint, hint, wink, wink, someone just happens to want their autograph for $1 million if they'll go play at their favorite school. But you know what? That's the world that we live in. And in the same way that we know that laws that people don't respect, that outlaw things that peaceful people were conducting in, that just creates black markets, right? We believe that in also so many different areas. Look, guys, I hate to tell you this, whoever's listening to my voice right now, your school is cheating. Your school is breaking NCAA rules right now as we speak. If you don't think that, you are so naive. Let me tell you. So why don't you just open the floor up and let the chips fall?
Yeah. Well, that's like with steroids in baseball. Let them in. Why not? Let's make it fun. Let them take whatever they want to. Open it up. But Alan, we didn't get to talk about a lot of the stuff that I set aside, which is good. That means we had great conversations, and this was fun for me. Hopefully, it was for you. I'm looking forward to being on your show as well. But before I let you go here, tell the good people of Finding Freedom where they can find your show, where they can learn more about you, follow you on social media, all that good stuff.
Sure. So new episodes of It's Too Late come out every Wednesday night at 9:00 Eastern time. And you can follow me. Every single platform is /Alan Mosley TV, ALANMOSLEY TV. So that's Facebook, Odyssey, YouTube, Twitter, all of them is .whatever /Alan Mosley TV, every single one of them.
You're lucky there wasn't another Alan Mosley who was doing the same thing, or did you have to pay them off to get those?
No, well, there wasn't anyone. The reason I added TV is because there's another Alan Mosley who's like a doctor in Jacksonville or something. And so
jerk.
if I ever go down to visit my buddy Meharry down in Jacksonville, I won't even be the most famous Alan there visiting him.
Nah, truly sad. You can't win this day and age. Too many people. Anyway, Alan, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Hope you all enjoyed that interview on Finding Freedom. Another awesome guest. And hopefully you guys also have subscribed to the Lions of Liberty podcast, and you're getting all 3 of our unique shows in your little listening device delivered to your ears. If you haven't, please do that. Just go to your app, you know how to do it, and subscribe. You can also leave us a 5-star review and a nice comment. We would prefer if you did it on Apple Podcasts, but anywhere you can on the internet, please leave us a positive comment. Also, if you want to support us, we would love that too. Please go to patreon.com/Lions of Liberty. You can support us for as little as a couple bucks, or if you get in at a higher level, you get merchandise and access to us and all the way up to you can advertise on the show or get to even produce a show. So check it all out, patreon.com/Lions of Liberty. And if you haven't checked it out yet, please consider checking out the Lions of Liberty store, where we have some awesome t-shirts. We have a Taxation is Death t-shirt with an awesome design. We have a Wax On, Tax Off t-shirt. And we're always coming up with new ideas and adding new t-shirt designs to the store. Check that out at lionsofliberty.store. And if you're in the Pride, you get a discount on anything you buy in the store. So you do both of those things and you win. That's all I got, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. This is John Odermatt signing off. Always remember to keep your head up and the fires of liberty burning.